selects Ross Blacklock.
Ross Blacklock there for the sack.
TCU, Ross Blacklock.
Jonathan Grenard, linebacker, Florida.
Jonathan Grenard came off the edge untouched.
And they have drafted Charlie Heck, an offensive tackle out of North Carolina, 141st overall pick. Penn State cornerback John Reed.
Might make a play on special teams. Reed down the 15-yard line.
It's in now for the Texans, and I've got it for you. Isaiah Coulter. Isaiah Coulter, a new Houston Texan.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And we're just over 10 days away from the draft in Cleveland. The LA Rams have got a house on the hill, and the Texans haven't got any picks, but we're going to try and work it out again this week, any later round gems. And we've got Lee Wakefield from the Full 10 Yards College branch. Lee, how you doing?
Very good, mate. Very good. Thank you for having me. It's always good to talk about the draft.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I think of all the stuff that's gone on in the last few years with the Texans, I think the one big thing, or the big thing we're missing from last year, despite the seasons just slowly fading out into nothing, was the fact that you couldn't even look forward to that top 3 pick that would have been ours. Gets bounced around a lot, and it's that Tunsil pick's been turned into a hell of a lot, and probably shows you the value of draft picks. Nick Caserio was in front of the media last week. He seems unconcerned by it. He called it a 50-50 gamble. How representative do you think that is, particularly from 67 onwards?
What is in how much do the value of those picks hold in the later rounds? Or
yeah, how likely they're about to pan out? And you called it a 50-50.
Well, I mean,
bet, really.
To be honest, with you guys, I guess one advantage for you guys is that you have known for quite a long time that you're not going to have any early picks. So you've been able to put all your scouting resources into these later guys, unless you're going to swing a trade and go back up. I know you've got a quarterback there that's in the vogue of a lot of people, and in the eyes of a lot of people is a tradable asset, especially with some things that you probably don't want to discuss that have been going on recently. But, if you guys are just going to sit there late day 2, day 3, you'd be able to put a lot of resources into it. So hopefully, instead of spreading your time and effort to scout a lot of early guys, you're going to be sticking with the guys in the later rounds, and you'll have some good information on all these guys. I know the process has been a little bit different this year because of COVID and everything else, and having to do things virtually, just like we're doing now with this podcast. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, where it's always difficult to get it right in the draft, and a team like Houston definitely need to kind of turn up, and they need to get some good players and kind of reload and refix what they're going to do and kind of come again after. It's kind of a new era, isn't it? We've no JJ Watt anymore and a couple of other guys who've left quite recently. And it's kind of, time to find the new breed and the new era of Houston Texans football. And that's what Caserio will hopefully be doing this year.
Well, it is. I think that there is some carryover, and there's probably a lot of frustration on my end. And I suppose the topics around Watson is, first time I've written about that, put an article out on podcasttexas.com today. Go and read it if you haven't already checked it out. Trying to focus on the draft as much as the sideshow off the field is distracted. In terms of Caserio coming in, Lee, in terms of your knowledge and what he's done previously, or what we think he's done. Obviously, I think the big knock was that Belichick would rely on his relationships with coaches and perhaps evade some of the input from the personnel department. But in terms of the type of players and in terms of the type of characteristics they've valued or shown a value to, and obviously Caserio is going to be his own man. But is there anything that we can learn from the Patriots drafts?
I mean, the Patriots are one of a handful of teams, aren't they, that I would say they do it their own way. They don't draft in a way that you would see the conventional teams draft. I'd club them in with Seattle as another team that does this. We see it's kind of become a running joke, hasn't it, that Seattle in the first round will always pick a player from left field, maybe from like the day 3 range that no one has down. And to a degree, the Patriots do that, and they draft really well for their system. They don't mind taking someone like me or you, or someone even in the mainstream media, over in the States, will say is a quote-unquote reach. But they draft really well for their team. They get good blue-collar football guys who work really hard, know their role, and obviously that's the Patriots thing, isn't it? Do your role, do your job. And, if you can bring that over to the Texans, it's going to be at least giving you a high floor in terms of the draft picks that you're going to take, because you're going to have people who are going to work hard, play the system right. And if you're well coached and you do the system and I'm thinking when I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about the Indianapolis Colts defense over the last couple of years. It's never had a great deal of star power, but it's got a lot of guys who play the system really well, play the system to the highest of their ability. And, it was a bit of a positive for you guys, and I'm sure we'll come on to the defense a little bit later when we talk about the Texans. The Texans are going to run a pretty similar defense now under Lovie Smith, and it relies upon people being in the right place at the right time. And, if you can get people who are used to doing that, people who, like I say, are blue-collar, hard-working players, then you're going to get that, and that should be a good thing for you guys in your defense. Sprinkling a little bit of star power over the next couple of years. And, I'm not going to say you're going to be back or anything like that, but, you could be moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, and I think I suppose when I sent you the notes, the system was the aspect that, probably a number of caveats right across both sides of the ball. Do we know exactly how we're going to play? I think when Lovie Smith spoke last week in front of the media, I think many would have been concerned in some of his observations, and he said he couldn't run his defense against opposing offenses at Illinois because it was and he cited some reasons why teams going 3-by-1 sets, which I don't know how much tape he's watched in the last number of years since he's been in college, but that's pretty common in the pros as well. So I think there's definitely a bit of a concern there. I think the holistic view or the viewpoint that I think that you've kind of got to take, there's going to be a lend towards the system this year, but I think we've also got to look of a balance of getting players that maybe aren't too system specific, because they'll need to fit future coaching staffs, because this retrofitted coaching staff is, bar a few, is here for the temporary. So we've made some assumptions, but we think we're going in the right way. But one guy you are familiar with, and probably the only quality kind of coaching candidate, did a great job with Justin Herbert, obviously made his name at Stanford and then moved to the pros, talking about Indianapolis in the division. What do you think of the Texans' incoming passing game coordinator / QB coach?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Pep Hamilton. Like you say, the Chargers coaching staff, again, pretty much like the Texans, has been a complete clear out. And I think the only guy who kind of left LA with a little bit of his reputation still intact out of that coaching staff was Pep Hamilton. As you mentioned, he did a fantastic job with Justin Herbert. He was almost, I was know he's QB coach, and there isn't that many QBs on the roster, but he was almost like a personal coach to Justin throughout the whole season. Every time you've seen it on the TV, Justin and Pep were talking. They were over an iPad, and when they were not on the field together, then they were discussing something, and it had a massive development, really massive positive development with Justin over the past year or so, or however long they were together. We know that, this time last year, Justin Herbert was not everyone's favourite, not everyone's cup of tea. He was a big armed quarterback with a lot of physical tools that people didn't think had the mental side of the game down. I think Pep had a big effect on that mental side of the game. I mean, we know Justin Herbert's an incredibly intelligent young man, but I think Pep Hamilton made him harness that and allowed him to harness that and put that into football senses. And I think he'll do a great job with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's much more developed, much more in tune with the NFL. And, he's also got a friend there in Tyrod Taylor, who's now your backup as well. So he's got a good confidant there. And obviously that was the quarterback that we were going to roll with early on in the season until week 2. And obviously this famous anesthetic injection into Tyrod's ribs.
Yeah, the stabbed lung that cleared the way for Justin Herbert last year. And I remember you and I talking about him last year, and I was not convinced. I remember watching a couple of games in college at Oregon, and it was a reasonable array or cast or supporting cast he had, but he didn't necessarily look anywhere like the player he did. And I suppose that's probably one thing we've got to remember. All points of this, it's a projection of what somebody's production might look like at the next level, and it's difficult, even right at the top end of the draft, to predict that. And obviously the Texans aren't there, and they might be there again next year with reinforced numbers, depending on the Watson outcome. I think, let's be honest, there will be a suspension, if not a holdout, for week 1. So it's likely to be Tyrod Taylor. Is there a serviceable starting quarterback, mid-tier, scrape you to 5 or 6 wins kind of guy in there still at this stage of his career, do you think?
I'm going to be honest with you, man. I mean, this time last year, obviously we needed a quarterback. We knew Tyrod was on the roster. Fast forward a few weeks, we got Justin Herbert in, And, I was a big fan of Justin Herbert coming out. I thought that he was a good quarterback. I thought he was a good prospect. I thought he had a really high ceiling. Obviously, he's kind of proven that now. But I was really happy for Tyrod Taylor to begin. I'm not going to kind of shy away from that. Obviously, that sounds kind of ridiculous now, considering the season that Herbert had. But I was actually pretty happy for Tyrod to go out and start and be the starter for the best part of the year. And I had confidence in him to be able to go and get, considering that the Chargers had a good supporting cast around him, maybe not the offensive line, but definitely the receiving weapons in the running game, on paper at least. I feel like I was happy for Tyrod to go out there and push towards 500, which obviously ended up being what the Chargers had as a record, or similar to that, but obviously with a different quarterback. So yeah, I completely think that as a spot starter, or even as someone who's going to start off the season for you, maybe the next 4 to 6 games, I think he's there, he's serviceable. There's some weapons in there. In Houston, you've got a lot of bodies in free agency, and obviously you'll supplement that with the draft to kind of make it a bit better of a situation for whoever's under center.
Yeah, and I think that was Casario's plan. He's obviously, as you see, continuous signed Lane Taylor last week. He'll come and compete for a guard spot. He's not played for 2 years. The same with Justin Britt will play at centre. I think so. There's definitely some longer term planning at various positions, regardless of who they've signed in free agency this year, to take to any point of the roster. I think is open for selection at any point across the 8 picks. Whether we trade back or not, that'll remain to be seen. I think that's quite a possibility, but I think 67 only garners so much capital back. Maybe get an extra fourth in there. But in terms of prospects, Lee, how do you see the whole process working this year? Because I've heard a number of times now in the last couple of weeks that people are just saying, I'm not even quite sure who's declared this year. The process has been so convoluted. You've got spring ball playing, you've got guys that are going to go straight back into the standard cycle in the fall and are going to play a lot of football and effectively trying to make up for their lost year with COVID. You've got guys who opted out. You've got guys who you just don't have a year of tape on. There isn't the same level of measurables and a uniform level that you would have at the combine. And I've also seen the biggest overriding feature, particularly defensive tackle, but the overall number of players that have declared for this draft this year is about 30-40% down on your average pool of players. There's roughly 300-400 players less declared for the draft. So is there a chance that it's going to be very top heavy, not deep in overall quality, but just generally not a draft to remember, and actually future years, if you were wanting to trade out of this year, might be a prudent move?
Yeah, we have seen that. I think we've seen a lot of talk of that, of trading out players and also trading out draft picks for next year. When you're going to have a bigger pool, more tape, more reliable, I'll say that with quite a bit of emphasis, athletic testing numbers, considering that all the numbers have come from pro days, and we've seen maybe some swayed numbers and some numbers that you guys take with a grain of salt or two. However, I do think that, like every draft, there are some deep positions and there are some less deep positions. There are some really deep positions groups in this draft class. I think wide receiver, I think cornerback, and I think offensive tackle and offensive line in general, I would say, are pretty deep. At the top end, you get some really top quality players, but also through into the beginning of day 3, maybe even the middle of day 3, you're going to get some serviceable players who have a good NFL career. However, like you say, some positions are really lacking. They're really lacking that high-end talent and also that depth as well. Defensive tackle that you mentioned is certainly one of them. I think someone who I can't remember the name of in the mainstream media over in the States actually said that it's one of the worst defensive tackle classes ever seen. Just period. You know what I mean? So just if you're looking for a defensive tackle this year, it's not the one, especially if you've not got a first and second round pick. So, you're going to have to be prudent with the way you're going to spend these picks. Like you say, you've got a number of picks, but not in the early stages of the draft. So you're going to have to be prudent. Like say, maybe that extra scouting time that you're going to have to have done on day 3 might yield some real gems, and that's obviously what you guys are going to be hoping for. But it's one of those, isn't it, where it is going to be a more difficult draft cycle for everyone involved because of the conditions that it's been done under.
Yeah, so we'll start off with the offensive side of the ball then. So as I put in the notes, I assume under Cully will be running power if he takes some of the concepts that they brought over in terms of a gap scheme, in terms of running the ball. It's what they ran predominantly at Baltimore. James Camden obviously is a guy who's the offensive line coach, who was a much needed change and hopefully an upgrade versus Mike Devlin. I think the much maligned Devlin, with all the talent we had at that position, across the front starting five, invested a lot, did not see results. In terms of Camden's style, or in his terms of his teaching, his philosophies, what do you think from the 1 year you saw him in LA? Do you think he can bring here? And do you think the gap scheme is something he prides himself on running, or do you think he's a bit more of a hybrid guy?
I think he can be a bit more of a hybrid guy. Obviously, he had a great deal of success in Green Bay with sort of bigger body rushers like Aaron Jones. He's not sort of pigeonholed to that. And then he's come over to LA for 1 year, although, it's small sample size. And we're not running with any power guys, really. We're running with Austin Eckler as our number one back, although he was injured again, unfortunately. But, when you're designing an offense for Austin Eckler, who is going to be backed up by Justin Jackson, you've got two guys there that are really shifty, good with their hands, great lateral movement. They're there not to run between the tackles, but to run around the tackles and take screens and other short passes to great effect. We did draft Ryan Kelly. No, not Ryan Kelly. What's his name?
Yeah, the guy for UCLA.
Yeah, the UCLA guy. I can't think of his name. His first name, Kelly. Joshua Kelly. Sorry,
Josh Kelly. That's the one.
And yeah, we obviously he's more of our power guy, but we drafted him in the 4th round. He was okay, but I think that he was a little bit of mix and match and things like that. So I do think he could be a versatile coach. But just as obviously he didn't last very long in LA, but at the same time he was revered as a great hire this time last year, or in the the off season last year, and we did think that he was going to be a real boon for that offensive line. It didn't work out because I don't think they had the talent on the offensive line, especially in the interior, which is why they've gone out and spent loads of free agency dollars on the interior offensive line. But there is some reasonable talent on this Houston offensive line. Obviously, you've got Larry Tunsil, Marcus Cannon's coming over, Titus Howard, obviously you drafted a couple of years ago. Maybe a couple of interior guys are needed, as we mentioned, but there's some pieces to work with. You picked them in free agency and that are already on the roster.
So if we start with the interior line in terms of centre, predominantly right guard, but I think guys will be able to transfer either side. Is there any guys in this draft you think in the internal spots that the Texans could look at 67 onwards?
So I've highlighted a couple of guys who have got guard centre versatility, because I feel like if you're drafting a guard centre interior and defensive lineman this late on in the draft, they need to have that versatility. They're going to have a hard time sticking on the roster if you're coming in as a pure centre or a pure guard, or you don't have any sort of versatility, whether that be guard tackle or guard centre. I feel like you'll need that. So one guy I've been pounding the table for a lot in this draft cycle is David Moore from Grambling State. He's going to go quite late. He's going to be a day 3 guy because he plays at such a low level at Grambling State. It's not a college that produces a great deal of NFL talent. He's a versatile player. He doesn't, he's quite short and stocky. I think he weighs in at about 360. So he's quite a large guard, but he does have a fair bit of movability in him as well. So he can definitely get out in front, not too far. He does have a short range, but he can certainly clear out some holes. Maybe at the second level. If you're thinking of Philip Lindsay, who you've obviously brought in, and obviously David Johnson, who hopefully be having a bit of a bounce back in I believe is a contract year, if I'm correct in saying that. David Moore really burst onto the scene with a lot of people because he had a great Senior Bowl. He was really stonewalling a lot of high-end prospects in Mobile at that event. And he's just a player that there's not a great Grambling State tape around, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. From what I have seen of him, he's certainly a player that I would give consideration to, maybe in the 4th or 5th round, as you guys are picking a few times in those rounds, and a bit later on as well. So if he's hanging around, I'd definitely go up and grab him. Like I say, he's going to have a little bit of versatility whether Camper wants to run a power or a gap scheme. And then the second guy that I have sort of highlighted is Michael Manet from Penn State. He's also going to be another late round guy, another versatile piece. Again, he's got power, but he's also got great hand fighting technique as well. I think he's got a little bit more to him in terms of pedigree than David Moore, obviously playing at Penn State, playing at premier school up there in the Big Ten. But he also was the number 1 guard in 2016's recruiting class at high school level. So yeah, I think in a phone box, I think he's going to bring a lot of leadership. He's going to bring a lot of power, and he's going to be able to, like I say, be a great pass blocker and run blocker. He's also really experienced as well. So he played 35 games at Penn State over his college career, coming out as a senior. I think he was a captain for 1 year, if I remember rightly, and he anchored the line at center for Penn State. But he does, he will be able to play guard as well at the NFL level. So, a couple of names there that I've kind of highlighted as day 3 guys who should be, pretty decent value there. Guards, they're never going to be these headline players apart from, your real top guys. And these guys will come in, they'll do a job, they'll stick on the roster, and like I say, they'll offer some versatility in a pinch if someone goes down injured.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think we want to be looking at guys who can come in and find spots, make the roster first and foremost, and then work their way into whether it be a rotation or whether it be finding their spot through injury or what have you. Those are the kind of guys you want to get, and probably likely the only guys you're gonna find this year. One thing that just flashed in my head, they're talking about the number of starts. It's a Parcells notoriety point on the draft that you've got to take guys who've got a number of years under college under their belt, understand systems, maybe gone through different coaches, and have shown a continued ability to perform. And I think in this year's draft as well, I think if you're taking underclassmen, you've got to be very, very careful that they've got the right upside and physical traits to be able to project. Because if you're just taking a raw guy who's not got a lot of game time, who should have stayed in college of all these years, to come out, it's probably the least likely one to find success. And you see that every year, the number of underclassmen going undrafted continues to rise every year. So I think, yeah, definitely the number of starts that guys have got is a big thing to watch out. And I think Caserio and James Lipford and those kind of guys in the front office, Matt Bazirgan, will be looking at that as a key stat for you, because I think the only position we probably won't draft, you never know, I think any position's up for grabs, but offensive tackle, just due to that investment we've made there with Laramie Tunsil, the 2 picks, then Titus Howard, and we've brought Marcus Candover, who I think will start at guard, but Titus Howard can move into guard. I hope he doesn't, because it is a big possibility that he could stunt his growth and his development, because he's still yet to play a full 16-game season since getting out of Alabama State in 2019. So I think, yeah, in terms of the offensive line, I like those guys, Lee. That's good, some good names for us. In terms of wide receivers, said this to a number of people now, we had a big body guy. We gave him away for not too much. But I think if you look at the roster, there is a need for big body perimeter wide receivers, guys who can go up and high point the ball, people who can be weapons in the red zone. Is there any kind of guys you've got earmarked for later day picks that could be in that mold?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly a area of the Texans roster that is really lacking, isn't it? It looks like you've got a lot of slot guys, you've got a lot of speedy guys, but like you say, really, really missing this big body on the perimeter who, like you say, can go up in the red zone or go up above someone and get you a vital third down. Obviously, you're picking third round and onwards, so we're going to be looking at guys who have got some warts. We're not going to be looking for a perfect wide receiver. Just on that, do you feel like the wide receiver will be the pick at 67, or are we looking a little bit later on before I kind of give you some names here?
I think it could be. I think it's going to matter who drops, and I suppose when you look at the shape of the depth of this class in terms of the way the big board's kind of fallen out, and there's a couple I trust, a couple that I think is manipulated by agents. But there's if you look at the slot position, it seems to be deep, and I think if there's somebody going to fall to them that they've maybe got an earlier mid-second round grade falls to 67, you've got to think it's going to be one of these slot guys, Elijah Moore, Cade Johnson, these type of guys that are going to fall. But I think the outside is a need. Whether that falls acutely at 67, I don't know. I would suspect, considering the depth of the position, it's going to be a very much a sort of fourth, if not, one of those 3 picks in the 6 kind of deal.
Sure. Okay. So just if one of these does drop, and this is kind of a dream scenario, I guess, if this is the direction that you guys choose to go, I think this guy's a second round player, but there is a chance, obviously, that he drops. Didn't test amazingly well, although the kind of tests that you look out for a kind of linear outside X receiver were very good. And that's De'Ami Brown from North Carolina. Yeah. Like I said, I think he's a second round player. I think he'll be kind of lucky if he drops to 67. Although, it's the start of the third round, isn't it? It's not exactly miles away from the second round. He's very quick, 4.45, 40-yard dash. He only runs routes off the vertical stem, really. Not a great deal of kind of a lot of, double moves or anything like that, or not routes that are really complex. But, if you're looking at the Texans roster and what you've got on there, as we mentioned, we've got a lot of slot guys. You've got a lot of kind of speedy guys. And you're looking for that guy who can go up and get it. De'Ami Brown is kind of more dominant at the catch point. He's, like I say, he runs off a vertical stem. He's got a lot of production at North Carolina over the past year or two. Obviously, when Sam Howell's come into the fray there, he's worked really well with him. And obviously he's going to be linking up with either quarterback who we're going to be starting here, Deshaun Watson, obviously an elite quarterback, and Tyrod Taylor's got an underrated deep ball as well. So Diami Brown could definitely be a player that will be linking up with him. If I'm going to kind of move on a little bit later on down the draft, my kind of go-to big guy, typical big guy, 6'4", 220 pounds, is Nico Collins from Michigan. He's got a lot of speed, doesn't have amazing hands, but I feel like, he's got a 4.43 40-yard dash time, not the most agile, again, kind of the same mold as Diami Brown. I'm going to steal a phrase that one of my guys, Kieran, off the full 10 yards, kind of coined the other week. He's a free trial version of DK Metcalf. He's a big-bodied wide receiver. He can go down the field. He can go up and get it. And he's got lots of speed to take the top off as well, but with a bigger body. And then my last one that I kind of want to highlight to you guys, which will be a real big recommendation, another guy who I've kind of been pounding the table for over the past couple of weeks, is a player that actually Lovie Smith might know from Illinois, and that's Josh Imotobebe, the wide receiver out of Illinois. An absolute athletic freak. He's only 6'2", so doesn't have that kind of big-bodied wide receiver body, but what kind of sets him apart is he's got a 47-inch vertical jump, so he's absolutely jumping out of the gym, in his pro day. And I think he uses that to his advantage, quite a lot, and he goes up and gets over people. And, if you're matching him up against a small slot guy or something like that in the red zone, he's just going to be able to jump up and dunk on guys quite easily. So I think one of those guys would be a great pick at 67, being Diami Brown, and the other two guys would be a bit later on. And if you are looking for a typical kind of big body guy, another kind of couple of names that will be kind of, your 6th round, 7th round picks would be Tevon Grimes from Florida and Tamorian Terry from Florida State. They're your kind of, prototypical big guys, 6'4", and, big wingspan.
Yeah, and I think that those are the kind of guys. The Diami Brown name, actually, I think is interesting because if you think a guy can flash in that way and a Mac Brown run heavy, you got their two tailbacks are talking about maybe going in the first 4 rounds this year. You think there's potentially more upside there than he's just been given the chance just by the volume of the running game. Obviously, Sam Howell is a potential name to watch in a year's time. I don't know, but he's again not a big sample size. Mitch Trubisky,
it's always the one, isn't it?
Echoes in everybody's mind, just as it does with a couple of the guys at the top there. The tight end class isn't something that people are hugely enamored by. Would you echo that sentiment?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was doing a podcast, another podcast on this sort of same thing. Well, me and the other guy were working through our positional top 5s on offense, and we recorded that on Friday. And we really got to the top 5, and we kind of trying to give out some sleepers and things like that. And neither of us could really come up with a great deal of sleepers with good value at this juncture, really. This class is really top heavy. It's got obviously Kyle Pitts, it's got Pat Frymuth, Brevin Jordan. These guys are all going to be off the table by 67. And after that, you are getting into some names that you really are just throwing a dart at the dartboard, really, and hoping for the best. My kind of best sleeper who you might be able to get a little bit later on might be someone like Kenny Yeboah. He's just a pure athlete, kind of like a jumbo wide receiver. You're not going to get him in line. You're not going to get him blocking or anything like that. I think you guys already have that kind of player on your offense and on your roster, so I don't think you're going to be dipping in.
Yeah, well, I don't know what your evaluation of Kahale Waring was coming out of San Diego State. He's a bit of an enigma, I think, on this roster. There'll be a question of whether he certainly is a physical specimen. I think that the criticism was that the information process and retention part of the playbook wasn't quite there. They did give him some looks towards the end of the season, but he didn't really come in and make an impact that you perhaps thought he would, considering he's been on the sideline for 2 years. In the 2019, back in the good days where you could do joint scrimmages, he absolutely walked over the Green Bay secondary, and everybody was kind of had huge anticipation for his output, but I think that he got injured. He took a concussion. He's been on the IR a number of times in the last 2 years for injuries that were suspect, I think. And so I think they didn't want to lose him, but I don't think he's been there to contribute. So hopefully he takes that sort of move tight end away. We've kind of obviously brought over Ryan Izzo from New England, who's just a blocker, probably sort of sitting at the 260-pound level. So he's going to just slot in right as the extra tackle in jumbo sets. So yeah, I think tight end. I would put it, in the top two, the bottom 2 or 3 positions if we were going to draft anybody in that. Now the Texans, as you said, have signed Philip Lindsay. They have signed, I don't know why, Mark Ingram, and we'll see what he's got left, unless he's a bit of a culture kind of driver for us. And we've also got a number of incumbents. David Johnson, of course, as you said, is a contract year. But why they kept him and increased his guaranteed money is an interesting one. But yet he is here again. I don't know if that was just a bit of affirmation for the D-Hop move that continues to echo around. But he's still here. I still think on this, despite there being Buddy Howell and despite there being Scotty Phillips on the roster who got chances last year, and actually when they did get chances, looked good. But I think their places are up for grabs. Is there anybody that you think they could bring in at any point of this draft who could either be a 3-down back, a runner between the tackles, or even a catching out the backfield, sort of kind of third down scat back? Duke Johnson was released on yet to catch on with the team. Any guys that kind of catch your eye that you think might be applicable, or just later round steals at that position?
I'll go the same route as I did with De'Ami Brown and suggest a guy who has been falling a quite a hefty amount, actually, considering where his standing was maybe this time last year. And then I'll give you some late round, maybe gems in both those roles, like a bigger guy and then more of a scat back kind of name. Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State, huge production guy, kind of an all-round 3-down back. He just seems to be falling through the floor right now. I don't understand kind of where this is coming from. Obviously, he's had injuries and things like that, but his production is second to none almost at the college level. He plays, and he's been that offense, basically on his own, barring a couple of other guys who've come through there. We've got Tevin Jenkins, obviously the offensive tackle, who's getting a lot of buzz now. And Chuba Hubbard kind of, loved running behind Tevin Jenkins. If you can get a guy like, similar to in style as Jenkins, and kind of let Chuba run behind him, I think he could be a real steal, especially at 67. I think that would have been seen as an absolute bargain 12 months ago and beyond. So he'd be my guy to jump up and get, run the card to the table, so to speak, if he kind of fell that far, and you could take him at 67. And moving into kind of the later rounds, if you're kind of looking for I've put here in my notes like a poor man's Mark Ingram, you're probably going to be able to fit Jerry Dokes from Cincinnati in at the 7th round. I don't think you're going to need to pay a great deal of premium draft capital for him. I think he's been a really productive back again for Cincinnati, one of the darlings of college football last year, of course. And, Jerry Dokes got a lot of attention. He got a lot of touchdowns. He got a lot of, kind of go in that offense. He's got a lot of touches, I think over 200 touches last year. He's a big, powerful guy, and like I say, could be a poor man's Mark Ingram if you kind of just want to have a look at Ingram, and see what you have there. If he doesn't kind of wow in training camp or in the early parts of the preseason, then maybe he can be let go, and Jerry Dokes would come in and probably do a pretty similar role. He's not going to have to be the main guy. And the other thing is he's got quite decent hands as well. If you're looking for a replacement for Duke Johnson, then maybe Puka Williams from Kansas. He's pint-sized. He's a patient runner with good acceleration as well. So I feel like if you're going to play the zone system, this would fit quite nicely. But he's also got great hands. And I do think that another guy who fits this mold as well would be Javian Hawkins from Louisville. So you've got a few names there that you could be looking out for. In terms of draft, sort of when you're going to get the guys who I've talked there about the scat back guys, the Puka Williams and Javian Hawkins, again, 6th, 7th round, you've got a bunch of picks in those ranges. You could get one of these guys for that range quite easily, I would say.
Yeah, it's a position we've not really invested in since Deontay Foreman coming out of UT in 2017 now. So I think it's a difficult position that we've just not managed to get juice and get a fresh set of legs at it. I think any guy that we probably do take will be sitting there for a year behind the incumbents and then be ready to go in maybe 22. But it's certainly a name that, or a number of names there that's good, to keep an eye on for the process. It's a position that we probably never thought we would be discussing, I think, this year. But is there any guys you think in this draft at the quarterback position that could potentially turn into the next Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott you can get in the mid rounds? That just get to the pros and ascend beyond what their college tape would suggest they would be able to do? I'm
really going to disappoint you, and I'm going to say absolutely not. This quarterback class is pretty slim. You've got the guys at the top, and obviously I'm not going to talk too much about those guys. Everyone's kind of heard everything there is to say about like the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, etc., and almost too much, in some senses, about a couple of those guys. A lot of poor takes and a lot of lazy takes coming out against Justin Fields in particular. I don't think there's many draftable quarterbacks after 67, if I'm going to be honest, if we're kind of keeping it Texan-centric, which we obviously will be on the pod. But if you're looking for a day 3 guy, if you want me to give you one name, one name that is kind of similar in style, maybe to Tyrod Taylor and Deshaun Watson. He's a senior. He's come out. He's got lots of experience. Is it maybe Ian Book from Notre Dame? Yeah. I don't think he's going to be a great pro. I think he's going to be a good professional. I think he's going to be able to sit there, QB3, learn, maybe take over from Tyrod when he goes. I don't know how long his contract is with you guys, but he's not going to. He's not going to be there for a long time. He never really is. And he might be a reasonable guy who can come in, play a start or so. He's quite clutch. He comes up in the big moments for Notre Dame, but the only reason I'm kind of spitting him out as a potential player is he's stylistically quite similar to Watson and Tyrod Taylor. You don't want to do something like what Buffalo did last year when they have a quarterback like Josh Allen, this big, bulldozer of a guy with a massive rocket arm, and then they go and draft Jake Fromm in the 5th round, who's absolutely nothing like him. It just doesn't make sense to kind of build your roster in that way. But I do think Book is relatively similar to the 2 guys that you've got in there. And, he's going to, like I say, be a good professional. He's going to be a little sponge when you come to the mental side of the game. And he might be a career backup, and you might not have to worry about that position then for the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, I watched the game. I think it was against Clemson when the Trevor Lawrence was out. Was that the previous year? I can't remember. No,
they played a couple of times this year. They played once in the ACC and then once in the playoffs. Yeah,
I think it was a playoff game that I watched. Yeah, and I remember just kind of thinking limited was probably the overriding emotion of him. And I think, what did you think of Ryan Finley? We've obviously picked him up. What was your avowal of him coming out?
He was a very, very weak-armed quarterback. Was not a fan at all. Can't really push the ball down the field. And, we mentioned it before, obviously Watson is an almost complete quarterback. Tyrod Taylor, as much as he's kind of limited, but he does have a great deep ball as well. So, as much as Tyrod does get bashed a little bit for being kind of a game manager and things like that, he definitely can sling it down the field. Ryan Finley would not be able to cope in that offense. I don't think he's a great mental processor either, if I remember right, thinking back to my evaluation before he went to the Bengals. To be fair, I'm not one of these guys who really is a big kind of pound the table for take a flyer on a QB. I think we're going back to Nick Caserio. Obviously, Bill Belichick basically takes quarterback a year and just sees what he has. I think it's a complete waste of a draft pick. I think you should only really draft a quarterback if they've firstly fallen, or if they're really some guy who you think can win a Super Bowl, which obviously you're only going to get in the 1st round.
Yeah, I think so. You see the overdrafting of it. And remember at the 2019 draft, it was kind of the first time you could sit there and go, you just want to hope as many quarterbacks keep getting taken so the better players kind of fall to you. It's probably a good position to be in. There's a certain teams up the top in the first sort of 5 or 6. Detroit, potentially Miami, if they move out, they're going to have their pick of the best non-quarterback out there, and guys are going to get overdrafted in front of them in the hope that they might develop into something at the next level. But yeah, again, I think you'll see guys going up the top end, Mac Jones and stuff, that probably don't warrant that. Would you agree with that? Would you say really, or this is my kind of layman's assessment, Lee? But if just from the stuff that I've pieced together so far this offseason, and I've been really late this year in getting an understanding of this. Just didn't watch a huge amount of college football last year. Probably disillusioned with watching the Texans games. That was hard enough every Sunday. So the Saturday term doing that as well probably didn't quite fit into the diary as much as you would have liked. But there's obviously an undisputed number one. There's probably a question of, I think, if you have very limited, or there's very limited tape out there on BYU, or limited exposure, but he's been a late riser in the same way that probably Baker Mayfield was, or there's been a number of them guys that have just kind of come in 1-year wonders. So you've probably got questions on him. You've got Mac Jones, who perhaps a product of the system. And then you've got a guy in Justin Fields who's bounced around, and he's not necessarily your most kind of polished prospect, if you compare him to Mac Jones, but he's got all the attributes, and he's played a lot of games, so he's still getting better. His ceiling is still increasing. So, would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would. Obviously, we've known about Trevor Lawrence for the past 5 years since he was in high school, on some level. And he's been kind of almost christened as the number one pick as he came into college. As soon as he was draft eligible in this year, then he's going to be the number one pick. And he's kind of, he's played that role and he's kind of lived up to it, and he's not disappointed in any way, shape or form. I do think then there's a quite clear drop off to the next tier containing Justin Fields and Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's my QB3 for sure. I think Justin Fields has got the pedigree. He's got all the physical attributes to be a modern NFL quarterback. And he's also got more game tape out there at a higher level than Zach Wilson as well. So it kind of puts him above Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's highs, however, have been really, really high. And they've come, obviously, at the right time when he's become draft eligible. And it seems like the Jets are infatuated with him now enough to take him number 2 no matter what. Then I think there's another tier drop off as well to Trey Lance. And I think Trey Lance is, again, another sky high ceiling prospect who has got all the physical tools, but he's only done it at this lower level. And then you've got a massive tier drop off to Mac Jones, who I think in any other year with a normal draft process, let's say, and maybe a bit more quarterback talent at the top and maybe a little bit more in the middle, which this draft severely lacks, I don't think you'd be talking about being a first-round quarterback at all. I think you alluded to people kind of pumping up the news that comes out and kind of leaking things like that. I have no idea where this talk of him going number 3 to San Francisco is. I don't know how you trade up for Mac Jones. I trust the guys who are running the show there at San Francisco. I think they're smart guys and I think they're good executives and coaches. I don't see how they're enamored with this guy who, if he wore another jersey last year, he wouldn't be in this conversation at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the guys he's thrown in, he's got 2 receivers that are going to go in the first round, and probably 1 or 2 offensive linemen at a minimum are going to go in the first 2 rounds as well. So, yeah, so you've got to evaluate the situation just as much as probably the individual and the traits. But flipping over to the other side of the ball, the once infamous Texas defense is no longer, and I think we saw that last year, 32nd against the run, 28th in DVOA. Just couldn't stop the bleeding at times, and it was tough to watch. So any defensive position, I think, would be a benefit. Again, we caveat this. There's an assumption that this Lovie Smith defense, maybe a year, maybe 2, will get out before we move on to the kind of next era of it and this kind of holding pattern that we're probably in, as depressing as a prospect as that is. But it's a cover 2, rolls to cover 3, kind of heavy zone, 4 guys up front just lugging it forward. The three linebackers just drop into zone and just try and clog up the passing lanes for the short and intermediate stuff. That's their assumption anyway. So we'll try and go through some draft prospects that fit that. As you said, it's kind of similar to Eberflus's system, a guy who was a candidate for the Texans before he kind of, I think, bowed out due to the Watson situation. And you can't really blame him. So you never know, in maybe a year's time, he might still be on the cards. But in terms of guys up front, we've obviously brought in Shaq Lawson. We've got Charles Omenihu going into year 3. It's probably, Jacob Martin is a guy that may or may not fit the scheme. He was a 3-4 outside backer standing up, dropping into coverage. Will he be able to have the mass to go and rush on the edge on this? We'll wait and see. But in terms of just the we've touched on defensive tackle being quite poor. Is there any guys that you think sort of mid to later rounds that have got that kind of overlooked factor, maybe just not in the right system, etc., who've got an upside that potentially you could find a later round gem? And they do happen every few years. Is there guys in there that you can think can make a difference up front in this year's class?
Yeah, there's one in particular. There's really one in particular. If you want a bit of pass rush upside from the interior. I just want to go back to the Texans roster, though. I do think you've got a couple of pieces up here. I was a big fan of Ross Blacklock coming out a couple of years ago. No, it was just last year, actually, wasn't it? Just last year.
Well, yeah, you'll need to find a way to get off the deck because that's where he spent most of his time.
And then I like Charles Omenihu as well, coming out of UT a couple of years ago as well. So I think you've got some guys there. I don't think it's all lost. But my guy who's kind of we're looking at maybe in the the early part of days 3, kind of in the later rounds, is Osa Odigizua from UCLA. We love him over at the full 10 yards, especially Raj and Kieran. They're big fans. He's got long arms. So obviously that length inside is obviously really important, really in vogue at the moment. And he's also got a wrestling background. So he understands leverage quite a lot. And I think he can out-leverage a lot of smaller interior offensive linemen, with the shorter arms that you kind of get stunted in there. Even some of these, top tackle prospects that we've got coming out this year are being kind of shoved inside because they've got quote-unquote short arms. If we're looking at millimeters, this threshold is not met by. He himself is a small sort of shorter, squatter, lighter interior defensive lineman, but he's also got that quickness to be a problem inside and got this length as well. And like I say, he understands leverage because of this wrestling background. He's a good athlete. And I think because of his size, because he's slightly undersized, I think you can kick him outside on long and late downs. So if you've got in a little bit of a NASCAR package and a lot of pass rushers on the field, he'd be your guy kind of push out there. So he's one that I really like a lot as well. I think you could get him around 4 or so. I think he'd be a really good pickup for anyone in that range, but definitely with the Texans, because I think you've got a many who kind of fits that role as well, and you kind of have them as being these versatile pieces on the kind of edges or even on the inside, because I kind of know that he likes to switch in and outside as well. I know you kind of other kind of type of defensive lineman, was the kind of bigger body kind of nose tackle. And there's a guy over at LSU, Tyler Shelvin, who is an enormous human being. I think he's going to absorb a lot of double teams in the early parts of his career. I don't think he's going to give you a great deal in sort of the passing game, but as you mentioned, run defense was not your strong suit at all last year. And I do think that Tyler Shelvin will help that, because I think he can be a pretty elite run defender at the NFL level pretty early on in his career. Whether you can get him to develop some pass rush moves or things like that, whether he's got the quickness to do that, because like I say, he's absolutely enormous. I think he weighs in at about 360. But he's a people mover. He can definitely get some push, and if he's ball rushing, and like I say, he's going to be elite nose defender, elite run defender. So yeah, he's a guy to look out for. You might need to spend that 6th or 7th pick on him because he is coming from that big school. He's got a lot of hype around him. But I do think, as much as nose tackle isn't a great position to kind of maybe spend your premium draft capital on, I do think he'll be a good value there, and he will make your defense better because I think he'll clog up the running lanes and take up 2 bodies to kind of move him.
Yeah, and I think that the big school guys, I think often sometimes can get overlooked, because they're maybe the 15th best player on the team, but they've probably got a role at the next level. Here's a guy I might throw you if it does, but that I've got. Just in terms of some of the guys you take a liking to, it's probably out of instinct more than anything else when you've not seen it. But Milton Williams from Louisiana Tech, he's a bit of a tweener for the tape I've watched. He's sort of 284, 285. So he's projected to be a 3-4 defensive end rather than a 4-3. But he's a guy that's been getting a bit of buzz and quite like some of his tape. He looks explosive. I think he's a guy who could probably play a sort of 3-eye or be out on the edge. Any thoughts on him?
I think the word that you just used a moment ago, explosive, is the word. He's going to be a problem in terms of athletic sort of ball rushing and just kind of using his speed and power on the inside. I think he's going to be a problem for a lot of these bigger, slower, lumbering sort of interior offensive linemen that you get in the NFL. I think he's got really short arms, if I remember correctly from his measurements, which could be a bit of a problem. But no, he's definitely a guy that's harboring like a lot of hype at the moment. And his athletic testing's off the charts. I think if you guys who are listening go over to Mock Draftable and type in his spider diagram and have a look at him there, he goes into the 99th percentile, 98th percentile for quite a lot of the athletic testing for speed and power. So yeah, he's definitely a guy who is going to be one to watch on draft weekend for sure, to see where he lands and see what system he lands in. Definitely an interesting play for sure as well. I think he'll get some early production just because he's going to be coming in, he's going to wear people down. If you're thinking about Tyler Shelvin, just going back to him, he's going to wear people down. If you have a big body like that, he's going to kind of wear him down, then you're going to unleash Milton Williams on these guys on long and late downs. I think he's going to be able to do some magic there. So yeah, no, definitely be one to watch out for.
Yeah, in terms of the linebacker positions, then obviously you've got 3 varying skill sets across this archetype that we're trying to implement in this scheme. Is there any guys you think that it seems like a position that's varied, and it's difficult to draft for, and again, you're looking at traits and hoping that applies and delivers some upside. Is there any linebackers that are suitable for this 4-3 you think that could be an option?
So I know you sent me over some notes and you kind of told me a little bit about the Texans and what you kind of guys are looking for. I kind of cheated on this one because I think in this linebacker class, I don't think you're going to get a great deal of kind of pass coverage in the late rounds. But there are a lot of safeties with kind of this hybrid mix of kind of this hybrid linebacker safety role. And one guy who I kind of noted down for this, who might be quite perfect in terms of his kind of run stuffing ability, but mixing that with some coverage ability, because obviously he's a bit of a safety as well, is Hamza Nasir Dean from Florida State. Probably going to need to take him with that 6th, 7th pick, if not kind of maybe move up a little bit to go and get him at the end of the 3rd. Not a linebacker as such as I mentioned, but he can certainly be used as this nickel, big nickel hybrid safety linebacker. He's built like a creator player in Madden. He's 6'3", he's just over 210 pounds. He's got a great range. He can run sideline to sideline. He's got really strong tackling ability. And I do think because it's like this Tampa 2 Lovie Smith defense, he'll fit in there with the coverage ability as well. Maybe as like a run and chase world linebacker if you kind of want to fit him in there, or like you say, in sub packages. He's coming off injuries, which obviously is a big red flag against him. He's coming off, I think he's had a couple of knee injuries in college, and it's one of those things that is going to make him drop. But that could be, someone else's detriment. And if you guys pick him up, he could fill in that role quite nicely. And he also might be able to moonlight as a strong safety every now and then. I think you guys have got Lonnie Johnson on the depth chart right now as your strong safety. I think Nasir Al-Din will probably be able to fill in a little bit better if he kind of gets boxed in that role as well. I know you asked about linebackers, but kind of cheated on that one.
I think it's changed, isn't it? Right, and I think you sub in. One of those backers are going to be subbed out for a nickel or a third safety. I think to develop in that sort of cover 3 look. So I think there's definitely. I mean, the game's changing. I think, and as you said, talking about the types of wide receivers that are coming out, but the types of linebackers are not really, there isn't many guys that come out that can cover the pass well. And I think when you look at these 4-3 systems that have worked well in the past, certainly I've seen or studied just watching the Texans film. If you go back to, the Carolina game in 2019, against Luke Kuechly and against Shaq Thompson and those kind of guys. And, they're just big, rangy guys, and they're, you've got to get them early, I think, and they're hard to come by. So if there's any kind of hybrid guys that can pick up and just fulfill a role, I think, and have got lateral quickness that can chew up space quick and close the windows, I think that's the kind of guys we're looking for. In terms of on the boundary or at nickel, I don't think either's ruled out. But is there any corners that you think might fall that have just kind of got the upside that they can take? It's not. There's very few, I think, beyond the second round, isn't there, really, that are immediate starters, but maybe some guys that are perhaps a bit of a project in there you think that could start to contribute maybe a couple of years' time with a bit of development and coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I like this cornerback class quite a lot, actually. I think it's quite deep. Maybe, judging by what you've just said there, I do feel like maybe I've got a bit of a higher opinion of this cornerback class overall than yourself. But I actually, we did a full 10 yards family mock draft a couple of weeks ago and actually picked for the Texans. Obviously, we just included kind of realistic pick for the Texans on the 67th pick. And yeah, I went for Trill Williams out of Syracuse actually in that draft. And he's a player that really caught my eye because I'm looking at your roster at the moment and you've got quite a lot of small guys at corner. Vernon Hargreaves, you've just signed obviously Des King, who's going to play exclusively as nickel corner. You've got Bradley Roby there, who's not over 6 foot either. Trill Williams is 6'3", like a proper 6'3" guy. He's going to add some height. He's also can move as well. He's a good athlete, and I do think he is more of a zone corner in terms of I don't think his pattern matching and his man coverage is that good. So I think fit him in at zone corner, let him have a little bit of things in front of him, and let him use his size and speed to run with people, in that zone and kind of match them up there. And I think Syracuse have had a bit of an underrated defensive back room, with the likes of Andre Sisco and the other corner, I can't remember the name of, Ifeatu Melifonwu as well.
Yeah.
Who
was it not his brother that came out of UConn, went early and flopped?
Went to the Patriots, I think. Or he's at the Patriots now.
Really yep.
Yeah, but Trill Williams, player that I think early-ish, third round, maybe the early fourth, I think will be there. Not this perfect sort of, like I say, number 1 day starter. Like I say, I've just named a couple of guys who are going to play in that role anyway. So you don't need a guy who's going to be coming in and contribute immediately, but he's definitely going to be able to get out there, get on the field, and should have pretty high upside, especially because you don't get many corners that are built like this as well. Looking into the later rounds, a player that I really, really like, again, not an athletic beast at all, and that's why he's going to be picked in, the 5th, 6th round, is Diamadore Lenore from Oregon. He's just a football player. This guy gets his hands on the football a lot. He's got 6 career interceptions, 21 pass breakups, and a couple of forced fumbles as well across his career at Oregon. They had a really exciting secondary as well coming into this year, but a bunch of the guys opted out, but he stayed and he came back actually after opting out originally. And he was the leader of that defense on the back end. And I think he really stepped up. The Pac-12 didn't play a full season, but This guy showed he's got a knack to get his hands on the football, as mentioned before. He's a great zone corner. Again, not great in man because he doesn't have the athletic ability to run with people down the field. But he's got great instincts, and like I say, he's a great football player. Just knows where to be, which I think you can't really teach. Do you know what I mean? It's one of these. I'll kind of give you two guys there with traits that you can't teach. One, True Williams being like height and speed and things like that. Lenore being just like knowing where to be and kind of an instinctual player.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think the traits are going to probably weigh out in the later rounds, aren't they? Because you want someone to work with. But I think, again, we just need guys. And one thing that Lovie Smith has touched on in the offseason has been finding ways to turn the ball over, because the Texans, and a lot of it is luck, and it comes in waves. But turnovers were just so hard to come by last year, and I think that was a big reason why in these close games you just didn't manage to eke out a result. So definitely, guys, you can find the football and turn it back over to whoever it might be. I think a lot of the draft talk and a lot of this offseason has seemed academical at times, just with all the kind of overshadow of the Watson situation. But definitely some good prospects there to get your teeth into. Lee, thank you very much for your time, mate. Much appreciated. What's your draft setup looking like over the weekend? I think from my point of view, kind of looking forward to it just from a pure football distraction more than the sort of courtroom drama that we're probably witnessing on a daily basis right now. We're trying to kind of stay away from, but it dominates the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll be up on round one, obviously waiting for that 13th pick, obviously as a Chargers fan. And then just glued to my phone and glued to the TV for the rest of the weekend, just kind of seeing who's going everywhere. Obviously, as someone who's kind of looked at the draft from an evaluation point of view, you've got your guys, you've got your favourites. You're kind of looking out for those guys, where they're going to stick, where they're going to kind of land, what the situation is going to be. Do you think they're going to be prosperous in that situation? And also, looking at the Chargers as well, obviously with my hat on, hoping that we get better, as every team is. But yeah, it's going to be obviously a long weekend. It's it's a late one on the Friday morning for us guys, but one that you're kind of looking out for and looking forward to. For the next one straight away. It's my Christmas almost, I always say.
Yeah, I think so. And it's where front offices make their name, and it's where you start to balance out a roster. And that's hopefully the steps that Nick Caserio is going to take. But that was Lee from the Full 10 Yards college team. Thank you very much for Lee for his time. If you haven't checked out the article already around the Watson situation, how I think the Texans should handle it and how we think the whole situation came about, rather in-depth piece going and probably levels that we didn't think we'd be writing or talking about, but here we are in off-season. Hopefully the draft is coming very close and the Texans can start to turn the page and be about football. But thanks again for Lee for his time. If you haven't already checked out the article, please do. And we'll be back next week talking a bit more draft just in the days running up to it. But if you've not been already, check us out at podcasttexans.com, at podcasttexans on Twitter, and now recently added on Instagram. Check it out. And thanks again for listening.